U.S. President Trump has announced he's imposing tariffs on the U.S. three largest trading partners, Canada, Mexico, and China, as soon as Saturday. The White House says it will implement a 25% tax on imports from Canada and Mexico and a 10% tax on goods from China. Trump has also threatened the EU with similar measures, but has offered no clear timeline. Trump had pledged the measure to boost local manufacturing in the U.S. and to pressure its neighbors to do more to stop the flow of migrants and illicit drugs into the country. Now, both Canada and Mexico have said they're ready to retaliate, but analysts say the U.S. tax will likely deal a heavy blow to Mexico, Latin America's second largest economy.
Factory workers in the Mexican border city of Ciudad Juarez are producing metal parts to be packed up and sent to the United States. It is one of Mexico's maquiladoras. These manufacturing plants, often owned by foreign companies, pair cheap Mexican labour costs with the benefit of doing business in the US market. A thriving industry that is threatened by US President Donald Trump's promise to impose high tariffs on goods coming from Mexico.
Our disadvantage here at the US border is that 60% of formal employment is in the maquiladora industry. This industry could leave because of the tariffs, because it would no longer be profitable to operate on the Mexican side of the border.
Trump says he will impose tariffs on goods entering the United States from Mexico, Canada, China and the EU. These import taxes will create revenue for the US government, whilst also giving locally produced goods a price advantage over imports. Trump says that tariffs will balance out trading imbalances with these countries, be a boon to US manufacturing, and are also punishment for what he perceives as a threat to US security.
We're thinking in terms of 25% on Mexico and Canada because they're allowing vast numbers of people. Canada's a very bad abuser also. Vast numbers of people to come in and fentanyl to come in.
His plans have put his neighbours on the defensive.
Canadian energy powers American manufacturing, businesses, and homes. Of America's top 5 trading partners, Canada is the only one with whom the United States runs a trade surplus in manufacturing. And Canada buys more goods made by Americans than China, Japan, and Germany combined.
The introduction of tariffs could also have negative consequences domestically.
I'm just skeptical that the way you get countries to sort of cooperate is by poisoning the well with the threat of really crippling, effectively economic sanctions that also hurt American consumers. I think that's the thing that needs to be reiterated here is that ultimately American consumers will bear the costs of these tariffs.
Tariffs, Donald Trump's favourite word in the dictionary. But experts warn that high import duties could lead to retaliation and potentially a full-blown trade war.
Donald Trump has promised tariffs on Canada and Mexico as early as this weekend. We heard it there. I asked Kimberly Clausing at UCLA School of Law whether he could actually do that, given that these countries have a free trade agreement with his country.
If he implemented those tariffs, it would certainly be contrary to the free trade agreement. The whole point of the free trade agreement is actually to give countries that are close to you special, better access to your market, not worse access to your market. So like in many other areas, Trump is being somewhat iconoclastic here in terms of his application of tariffs. But there are a lot of presidential authorities that would allow for unusual levying of tariffs, including for national security reasons, for emergency reasons, or due to unfair trade practices. I expect he would lean on the emergency rationale, but I don't know what he will do.
And whenever we talk about tariffs, the argument comes up that the American people will end up paying the price. Who do you think would suffer most from tariffs?
Absolutely. I think the evidence is crystal clear that the American people would suffer the most. And this happens in more than one way. First, the consumers will pay more for imported goods. And evidence suggests that the vast majority of the burden, if not all of the burden, would fall on consumers in the form of higher prices. This affects not just imported goods, but also goods that compete with imports. So if you're a domestic good and your main competitor is a foreign good, then you're going to raise prices. So U.S. lumber might get more expensive when Canadian lumber gets more expensive. But it also hurts U.S. production. One thing to remember is that our production is highly integrated across North America. So if you are introducing new frictions into trade between us and our closest trading partners, that certainly will reduce the competitiveness of U.S. manufacturing, it will reduce U.S. exports, and it will harm the supply chain in ways that could show up as recession.
So what's the upside for Trump? What is he trying to achieve here?
I think Trump has always tried to blame foreigners and others for things that might be better solved domestically. So this is one way for him to tell working class Americans, look, your bad plight is because of other people, and I'm going to levy tariffs on other people. He doesn't seem to worry about the fact that the evidence suggests that his tariffs would actually hurt the very people he's purporting to help. And I think in a way it's sort of a smoke and mirrors distraction from a fiscal switch he's suggesting, which is instead of taxing people through the income tax, he wants to shrink the income tax, which would fall disproportionately on those at the top of the distribution. And he wants to expand this inefficient and regressive revenue source that would fall more heavily on those that are poor or in the middle class. And you can't just come out and say, I want to increase taxes on middle class Americans to pay for tax cuts for those at the top. But this is one way to distract people through this mechanism of foreign blame and achieve the same ends.
Trump has also promised to slap tariffs on China and the remaining BRICS nations. What could the potential global fallout be of that move?
The broader the tariffs, the worse it's going to be for the world economy. If he levies tariffs on every country in the world, that's more harmful than just singling out a few countries. That said, China, Canada, and Mexico are the United States' 3 largest trading partners. So when you start with those 3, you're already getting nearly half of U.S. trade included in your trade barriers. I think that the cost to the world economy is that when other countries retaliate, they're also going to be putting costs on their own consumers. When their exporters have smaller markets, that's going to harm their exporters. And so there's going to be sort of a combination of pressures that raise prices in the world economy and also pressures that hurt output and efficiency in the world economy. And it's going to be a difficult decision for other countries about how to respond, but retaliation is what I would expect. And that just sort of adds insult to injury for the world economy, even though it's probably a rational way to deal with this policy.
That was Kimberly Clausing of UCLA. Thank you so much for all those insights. Great speaking to you.
We can bring in now John Kirton, professor of political science at the University of Toronto. So Trump says these tariffs are to help clamp down on illegal migration and the flow of dangerous drugs into the United States. But Canada is responsible for around 1% of each of those, according to the government. So what exactly do you think is motivating Trump with these tariff plans?
I think he's made it very clear for a very long time, both on the campaign trail before then, and then since he won his victory, that he's the tariff man, and he's going to use them so he says, lower the taxes that the United States citizens pay at home. What was a bit surprising is that he chose to hit his closest neighbors and allies, Canada, the longest one, and Mexico, too, because our economies are now so integrated with the United States, he's going to harm Americans from the first second as well.
Well, as you were saying there, Canada is one of the United States' closest allies and has an incredibly intertwined economy. It's the 3rd largest U.S. trade partner. So what effect do you think that these tariffs are going to have both on businesses and consumer prices?
Oh, it's going to be very bad news in Canada for sure. Estimates say that there'll be a drop in Canadian gross domestic product of between 2.6% up to 6%. The immediate effect, if the Canadian government retaliates by putting tariffs on American exports into Canada, as the Canadian Prime Minister has said his government will be, yes, higher prices in the grocery stores right away. And then, given the integrated supply chains, higher prices on many other things, which we import directly from the United States, orange juice from Florida, but all of the parts and components we import to build things in Canada, like cars.
Well, as you were saying there, the Canadian government has already promised a response if Trump introduces these tariffs. So do you think this could be the start of a trade war like we saw during the first presidency of Donald Trump regarding China?
Oh, very much so. The president has just said within the past few hours that he's not going to put tariffs on Canadian oil and gas into the United States. That's our biggest export sector. He's going to wait until February the 18th and then only put a 10% tariff on. But once the Canadian government retaliates with dollar for dollar tariffs on American goods into Canada, as the government said it would, it's easy for Donald Trump just to raise the oil and gas tariffs up to 25%. That would mean, of course, Americans, when they buy gas at the pump, would pay, well, $1 or $2 more, and that's highly politically sensitive. So we'll just have to see how much pain he's willing to impose on his fellow Americans in order to punish Canada and to show all of America's trade partners, the big ones, with the European Union next in line, that he's going to hit them too.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. That was Professor John Kirton at the University of Toronto. Thank you very much for your expertise.
Good to be with you.